Imaging, and one of the things I recommend to my students when they're thinking about development of imaging techniques is to always think about how I would do this if I were going to start all over. I came from a background in high energy physics, and at that time, whenever you wanted to look at a new particle or something like that, you had the option of either using an existing spectrometer, which might have some limitations, or developing a brand new spectrometer that did exactly what you wanted it to do. So this is the approach that we've taken in our medical imaging activities so far. With regard to emulating people, there are a number of amazing people in the society, including Steve, people like Dennis Parker. I came to this meeting with a notion for a CT project, which I'm now too tired to do, but then discovered in the last couple of days that Dennis Parker had done it 35 years ago. So keep looking at the past, keep looking at the example of these people. You know, the world is changing a lot. You've got to keep an eye on it. I'm sure you're all aware of all of the complications that have arisen with the need for passwords for just about everything. Why, yesterday I couldn't go to the bathroom because I had forgotten my password. So you got to stay on top of things and be aware that the world is changing. Once again, I really appreciate the nice honors that Steve has given me. And again, I would recommend him and people like Dennis Parker and others as examples for how to proceed with your own career.
Thank you, Dr. Your contribution to this field is impactful and tremendous. And at this moment, it's a great honor for us to have three of you here for the Fireside chat, and all of you have been the past president of this MRA field. So it's time for me to start from the most serious questions at this moment. So as the leaders in this field, what's the opportunity for you to start in this field? And after working in the field for such a long time, how do you look at this field, and what suggestion would you give to the next generation on choosing their field to work on?
You know, I think we've heard some of these concepts in the first two specific talks this morning about grantsmanship and about the career path that Laura mentioned. And I think these apply to anyone who's getting started in their career. And hopefully this material that I showed and that Michael showed as well, can kind of be used as guidance for time management. We think of that as maybe short-term management and long-term career in terms of 20, 30 years. I mean, chances are what you're working on today is not what you're going to be doing 20, maybe even 10 years from now. And I think to have the self-confidence in your training in yourself to be able to identify and then work and then feel that you can actually contribute to a new area is really key.
Maybe a couple of comments just from the the science perspective. I mean, MRA and MRI is such a rich field because MRI is such a versatile, interesting technique, and there's all these new discoveries all the time. I mean, I started working on, I recently was invited to give a talk to talk a little bit about my career and how I got involved in MRI imaging, and then I realized, wow, I've been working on flow imaging for 20 years now. And if you had told me, like in 2001 when I started this work a little bit earlier, in 20 years from now you'll still be working on flow imaging, and I would think, well, that sounds kind of boring. I mean, why would I work on, how can you make a career out of flow imaging for 20 years? And I think, I could. And the reason is that when you get into it, you just discover all these nuances and interesting aspects and get new ideas. And then you go to meetings like this and you present your work and you realize, and that's actually, there's an interesting story there. So maybe I can digress a little bit. In my first SMRA meeting, which was then the Angel Club, was in 2001, and it was actually in Madison, Wisconsin. And this was the first time I met Chuck. And this was just the first year of my postdoc at Stanford, so I was very excited to go to this meeting. I didn't know it at the time, and I think I had an abstract on some view sharing with flow imaging, of course. And then I was very proud, and I presented it. And then I saw all the talks about tricks and view sharing, and I realized, well, I've been doing this for 10 years, and I came here with my, wonderful abstract. But that, wasn't bad or problematic. It was just very enlightening that with the same concepts, there were so many more things you could do in such a wide area of applications. And I found that very inspiring, to find that community who thinks in the same ways, but maybe goes in different directions and different applications. But here you come together, you learn from each other. And then I went back, continuing my postdoc with so many new ideas just from this one meeting. So I think that's really a little bit the essence to me, is really, if you're young, if you're a trainee, your work is important, but leave room to be inspired by others and learn from others and be ready to take your work in a new direction if you feel that's important.
We do want this to be an interactive session, so if anyone has questions, feel free to start heading up to the microphone. And in that time, I'll ask, how has your opinion or definition of success changed throughout your career?
Actually, I think when I was a graduate student, I remember Chuck telling me, I'm not sure you remember this, but he said it's possible to have the success syndrome. I think this is especially true for people working in high energy physics, but it can be true for anybody, trying to identify a new particle, maybe get a Nobel Prize for it, which has been done. And it's something to be aware of, but I think that we've heard from all the speakers here, it's critical to have time for yourself, for your activities, for hiking, or for fishing, or for music, or for grandchildren. And sure, you want to have your articles be cited and you want to advance, but I think that to maybe temper that with what's realistic and have a life as well.
Maybe one quick comment on that in terms of, what do you consider success? I think there is something that changed, at least it changed for me. When you do your master's and your PhDs, you're kind of laser focused on getting your PhD done. I mean, that's the most important thing in your life at this point from the work perspective. And that makes a lot of sense. That's very logical that you want to get your PhD done and finish. So that's what you really focus on. But after that, when you become a PI and mentor, I think the most rewarding thing to me now is my trainee or postdoc or junior faculty, if they get a grant, if they're successful, if they find a position at a prestigious institution, that's actually the greatest thing that can happen. Because then that means you've actually managed not only to do well for yourself, but you've helped others to be successful. And I think that's one of the most rewarding things in terms of success for me today.
That's an excellent point. When I looked at the list of Chuck's mentors, sure, I'm on that. I'm proud of what I've accomplished, but there are many other people on there as well. Dr. Bob Kruger got into optical imaging. Dr. Willie Callender was one of the early students who basically invented spiral CT. People have gone on into X-ray imaging, other things. Dr. Polzin, I know, was a major scientist at GE, just to list other ones. And so success like that is based on having mentored all these people over the years and seeing them grow. And like Michael said, it's a sense of pride when you see your students and fellows go on and have careers of their own. I feel the same way.
Yeah, Chuck is certainly a role model for this. Obviously, if you, again, as you mentioned, look at the very impressive list of his former trainees and postdocs who are now, all leaders in the field and partly at this conference.
I think that's one of the biggest sources of pleasure for my career is watching all of these people grow and become leaders in their fields.
Just a question about, Ray, for Chuck, probably about inspiration. How in the 1970s, can you tell us a bit about how the inspiration came for digitizing X-rays, black, white and grey into matrices and numbers, and the inspiration for subtracting them and inventing DSA? How did that come about? Because that's really the way your career started, with this kind of seed of inspiration. Have you got anything to say about that?
Yeah, it started with our desire to image iodine, and we did this with K-edge imaging. And we did it at first with analog storage tubes, which were unreliable. And so because of that, we decided to build a digital signal processor to do our K-edge imaging so we could change the balance parameters. But in the meantime, people at Arizona and Kiel Kinderklinik had shown that time subtraction really produced some very good angiograms. And so we converted our K-edge imaging apparatus to a real-time subtraction apparatus, and that's what became the origin of the DSA, so that we could see things in subtractive mode in real time.
You asked us to put together some reminiscences, and I've actually done this, so I have just a couple slides if we have time.
Sure.
Good, but you're all right.
This is just a reminiscence, a specific one I have about Chuck. Again, I've known him for 30 plus years, and I think we know Chuck is highly innovative. He's motivated by other people's works. He's competitive. He's willing to propose a practical, if not the most aesthetic, solution to a problem. And he's persistent in getting results. The ones I have in orange here are things that I highlighted in my own talk about career, long-term career. Anyway, this is a story. Chuck and I were fishing up on Ranger Lake in northern Saskatchewan, and I was fishing with Chuck for lake trout. I was proud to say very successful catching fish. Here's a picture of myself. Chuck, less so, considerably. And the trick was to get the lure down 40 feet. So what was going through Chuck's mind, I think, was how can I get my lure down deep? How can I catch a lot of lake trout? And you see the third point there. So anyway, the next day, Chuck scrounged around the lodge shop to get weights for his lure. So he found a plumber's pipe, large heck nuts, padlock, several pounds worth. He'd rigged up a weight and attached a lure to this. So here's a picture I took of him the next night out. You see in his hand the lure, a spoon with hooks on the end. But then highlighted in the box are the pipe, the hex nuts, and whatever. Actually, a large heavy weight that, who would think that this would work? But believe it or not, that night, Chuck caught this beautiful lake trout with this makeshift lure, and it just shows the level of innovation and persistence that he has shown in his scientific career. He's also shown in his personal life as well. Thanks.
Does anyone else from the audience have a question they'd like to ask?
I actually do, since I'm here. And this is maybe a question for all of you. We've talked a little bit about finding a mentor in this session. What do you think characterizes a successful mentee? Like, what have you found throughout your career has been the unifying characteristic, especially as people come to that mentor-mentee relationship?
Maybe I can start if that's okay. So to me, what's important is that it's and it's always been the case, a two-way relationship. So it's not just mentoring, the mentor mentoring the mentee, but it goes both ways. So the most successful mentor-mentee relationship for me is when it's fun for me and when I learn something myself from the mentee. And it could be through discussions, but it could also be lessons for life or anything. It's really that there is a give and take in both directions for this relationship. And that means, meeting often, having open discussions, talking about things and that type of relationship. I think that's very important. And I think if the relationship exists, if there's really a back and forth and it goes both ways, then it's also fun for both and both learn from it. I mean, also just from a science perspective, often you have a new student, new grad student, new master student, or medical student who works with you, and then you put them on a project where you don't, maybe I shouldn't admit this, but you don't know too much about. And then pretty much I learn from the student a lot about this kind of new area, and that's, to me, is fantastic. So, you kind of send them off, they do literature research, come back, you discuss the results, and then you start jointly developing a project, and that to me is a very successful relationship where both sides really contribute to success.
Thanks, Michael. I would add a couple things. I think that professional communication at the informal kind of level is very key. I mean, iClassic is your mentor theoretically inclined or experimentally inclined? I mean, what's the style? What's your own style as a graduate student? What's the mix of that? I mean, how careful are you with the data? Are you overly careful, or do you just kind of, get the result and show it? So I think that level of professional communication is important. Michael mentioned a two-way communication, and I think that this doesn't always happen, but when I have students, and I'm sure Chuck and Michael feel the same way, we want that student to become, the world expert in whatever his or her project is, whether it's hyper, or whether it's 4D or 5D flow. And I think it's critical for the student to actually realize, gosh, I have potential in this lab or in this project to get to that level. And so that's, I think, a very key thing for students to realize, that they are now at the point in their career. They're not just taking courses to get grades, but they're actually trying to make an active contribution to a scientific area.
Dr. Mistretta, do you have anything to add on to this?
Oh, I think they've covered it.
Something else I wanted to, maybe this is like a meta question. I know you all know each other fairly well and have been acquainted for a long time. Do you have any questions for each other? And if you think of more later, just ask them. But I would be curious to know what questions you have for each other, if any.
I want to ask Michael why there were two or three papers that his name was not on.
Yeah, that was an oversight, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I had a question for Michael too. I mean, that was a fantastic work schedule you have. So that's, I'm blown away by the number of activities in your calendar. I'm not surprised though with your level of productivity.
Yeah, well, it's a mix of things and a mixed blessing, but I always feel like if I'm that busy, that must be a good thing, because it seems like people want to meet with me and talk to me about interesting things, so I take it as a positive aspect of my life. Maybe my question for the two of you is, you've been at, or maybe for Chuck, you've been at one institution for a very long time, at UW-Madison, and very successful, obviously. Hugely successful. But then there's a lot of other people say, oh, you need to move around in your career from institution to institution, what is your, if somebody asked you about that for an academic purpose, you've chosen to stay at UW-Madison, be very successful. Is that the exception, or do you think it matters or doesn't matter, or what's important for, I guess, picking where you want to continue your career after you've done your PhD, after you've done your postdoc, when you kind of have decided I want to stay in academia? Do you have any insights for us?
Well, I kind of got stuck at UW because of family reasons and grandchildren and all of those things, and I had no real reason to switch. Some people do that to raise their salary a little bit, and that works, but I had no interest in that, so I was happy to stay there.
Yeah, this is a... Yeah, Dr. Poppy?
That was just a fantastic session, and all of the panel have an incredible amount of cumulative wisdom. Congratulations again, Chuck, on an amazing career. And one thing I would sort of suggest to young people and young investigators starting out is not to make Chuck Mistretta's career your goal, or you'll be disappointed. You could do an awful lot worse and still have a fantastic career. Several of the speakers have emphasized the importance of persistence, which of course is absolutely essential in research and in all walks of life. On the other hand, Steve emphasized the importance of doing lots of things and thinking about other areas. A very difficult question I'd pose to the panel if you're giving advice, general guidelines to young investigators and students. How do you try to find the balance between persistence in something and obsession or flogging a dead horse when something just isn't working out?
That's a tough question. I think, let me use just as an example the NIH review process. I mean, I think all of us have been on NIH study sections, and many of you have as well. And I take that process as one where people in general, I mean, in my case, I think almost always have tried to offer constructive criticism of what I've been proposing to do. And I think it's key, to fold that into, your own evaluation of what your project is. I remember this is years ago, a colleague of mine that had never been on a study section, but had a pretty cynical view of them, of the process, just felt it was an old boys network kind of thing, was a member. And he participated with us for 3 days, and then we got done. I remember talking to him afterwards, and he said, Steve, this really is a pretty fair process. I'm just impressed at how it has been done. So I think that's one aspect. But I think another key thing, though, this is where mentoring comes in. Do you have a colleague you're comfortable talking with that maybe a little bit distant from, not directly involved with your project, that can really, try to shed light on what the pluses and what the minuses might be of what it is you're trying to do. And maybe offer suggestions. If you can show this, then this makes it not just feasible, but very viable. So it's a tough question to answer, and I think all of us have had to face this over the years. But you have to fold in the information and come up with your decision.
That's a great answer.
I think we have time for one last question.
Well, I was thinking, Steve and I are about the same vintage, same time scale, and Michael, you're very young, and Chuck, I'm almost there. But, I'm curious, though, when you get to this stage in your career, you look back and say, I made decisions very early on that put me here. I'd like to just know, if you weren't here, where would you like to have been? What would you like to have done with your career? I think Steve may be a concert pianist, maybe.
Yeah, I was thinking that, like Steve, I wish I could play the piano, and that's one of the things that I hope to learn how to do in my retirement.
When I've made comments at meetings like this, just after meals or something, been asked to, I think that I just feel very fortunate to have gotten my PhD at the dawn of CT scanning and of MRI, because these are fantastic modalities for the practice of medicine. There was a survey done of medical practitioners at the Y2K time frame. I mean, this is back when there were polls, who was the most important person in the 1900s, or what's the most important invention. This was a survey of 300 general practitioners asked. They were given a list of 25 or so different advances in medicine. And the one that was at the top of the list was the combination of CT and MRI. And this field has had a fantastic impact in the practice of medicine. And I just feel very fortunate that when I was starting graduate school, that is when this was getting started. And we're still riding the wave here today. We're seeing advances well beyond what was envisioned then. And So I feel very fortunate to have chosen this for my career. And as seen in these surveys like this has had a major impact on society.
It's such a great time to have you here and share all these wonderful stories and experience. And we really hope to have more chance in the future to have such a chatting. And now let's thank Drs. Mistretta, Ridley, and Marco again for having such a wonderful Fireside chat with us.